There's something really strange about the world we live in today. Everyone wants to be seen, everyone wants to be heard. There's this constant urge to broadcast our opinions, our wins, our pain, our lives loudly, instantly, publicly. It's almost like if you're not shouting about your journey, you don't matter. And for a while, I believed that too. I believed that I needed to keep speaking, keep explaining, keep proving that I belonged. But what I didn't realize at the time was that sometimes silence is louder than noise. Sometimes silence can carry the weight of resilience, of focus, of strength that noise simply can't. I learned that the hard way. I remember being surrounded by opinions all the time, industry experts, family friends, strangers on the internet telling me who I should be, what I should do, how I should speak, how I should sit, what success should look like for someone like me. It was overwhelming. The more noise there was around me, the more I felt like I had to respond to all of it. And I did for a long time. I tried to be agreeable. I tried to fit into boxes that weren't made for me. I adjusted, I explained, I defended myself. And all it did was drain me, because the more I spoke to please people, the more I lost myself. I got tired of always being on the defense. I got tired of explaining why I was ambitious, why I didn't want to just stay in my lane, why I didn't want to fit the mold. It felt like I was screaming into a void that only ever echoed back criticism or condescension. And that's when it hit me. Maybe I didn't need to keep speaking. Maybe I needed to stop. Not forever, not because I had nothing to say, but because I needed to conserve my energy for the right moment, for the right battle, for the right purpose. That realization was so liberating. Choosing silence wasn't about giving up. It was about reclaiming my power. And you're silent. You can actually hear. You can hear the truth beneath the noise. You can hear your instincts whispering. You can hear your heart beating. You can hear your own thoughts without them being filtered through other people's expectations. It's a clarity that you don't get when you're constantly reacting. And I promise you, clarity is everything. Because once you get clear on who you are and what you want, the world starts to shape itself around that clarity. You stop chasing approval. You stop explaining your ambition. You stop apologizing for your dreams. People often think silence means weakness. They think if you don't speak up immediately, you're afraid or unsure. But I found it's the opposite. It takes immense strength to stay quiet when everything inside you is begging to react. It takes maturity to let others underestimate you without trying to prove them wrong immediately. It takes confidence to know that you don't need to say anything right now because your actions will speak for you later. That's the kind of silence that builds empires, the kind that creates space for real growth, the kind that fuels transformation. There's this strange expectation, especially for women in the spotlight, to always explain ourselves, to justify our choices, our tone, our ambition. But the truth is, you don't owe explanations to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. And silence becomes your boundary. It becomes your refusal to be defined by someone else's limited vision. It becomes your refusal to shrink to make others comfortable. And it becomes your armor and your strength. When I stopped defending myself, when I stopped reacting to every criticism, every rumor, every judgment, I finally found peace. And let me tell you, peace is a game changer because peace creates focus, and focus leads to power. When you're no longer busy responding to noise, you get to actually build, you get to create, you get to prepare, and preparation is everything. I've spent years building in silence, training in silence, evolving in silence, and then when the moment is right, you show up and the world sees something they didn't expect. And it's not about shocking them, it's about showing them what happens when you stop wasting your energy on proving and start investing it in producing. You learn to value your voice when you don't use it all the time. You learn the weight of words when you use them sparingly, intentionally, and people notice that. They start listening differently. Because now when you speak, it's not noise, it's impact, it's purpose. That's how silence becomes your superpower. It creates contrast, it builds anticipation, it commands respect, it teaches people to listen, and most importantly, it teaches you to listen to yourself. Silence also reveals people. It shows you who needs your attention and who doesn't, who respects you in your quiet and who only valued you for your performance. It shows you who is watching you silently rise, who is cheering for you in your absence, and who fades away the moment you stop entertaining. And that's important because success isn't just about what you achieve, it's about who you keep around you while you're achieving it. Silence gives you the space to observe all of that, to filter your circle, to build your tribe, not based on noise, but on alignment. Sometimes people think I became quiet because I didn't have anything to say. The truth is, I became quiet because I was tired of saying things that people didn't really want to understand. And when I stopped speaking for them, I started living for me. That silence became the most honest conversation I ever had with myself. It helped me understand my own pace, my own triggers, my own capacity for resilience. It helped me recognize when to fight and when to flow, when to speak up and when to let silence do the speaking for me, because silence isn't absence, it's presence without performance, it's depth without drama, it's power without noise. There's an underrated power in listening that most people don't recognize. Everyone's always rushing to speak, to interrupt, to finish a sentence that wasn't theirs to begin with. But the ones who know how to truly listen, they hold a power that's subtle but sharp. I didn't always understand that. I used to believe that being the loudest in the room meant you were the most confident, the most respected. But I've learned that it's not the volume of your voice that creates impact. It's the intention behind your silence. And when you choose to listen instead of speak, you begin to see everything differently. Listening changed the way I approach every room I walk into. It became my strategy, my advantage. Whether I was at a meeting, a set, a negotiation table, or in front of an audience, I observed more than I spoke. I watched body language, tone, expressions. I paid attention to what wasn't being said. Because that space between words, that pause, that discomfort, it always says more than any scripted sentence. Most people listen to respond, not to understand. But when you actually sit in the discomfort of someone else's truth, without trying to twist it, solve it, or counter it, you gain a kind of insight that can't be found in books or boardrooms. It comes from experience, it comes from empathy. In silence, you begin to hear yourself clearly too. And that, for me, was a revelation. We live in a culture that glorifies noise, music blaring in the background, constant scrolling, non-stop conversations, endless content. It's exhausting, and after a while, you can't tell what's your voice and what's everyone else's. But when you strip all of that away and give yourself the gift of silence, you finally hear your instincts again. You remember what you truly want, what you value, what you fear, what you crave. That's where self-awareness is born, not in chaos, but in quiet. I've sat in rooms with people far more experienced than me, people who could have easily intimidated me, and instead of trying to match their energy or prove something, I chose to listen. I asked questions, I absorbed, and I watched how that shifted the dynamic, because when you're truly listening, people feel it, they feel seen, they feel heard, and that opens doors that ego can never unlock. Listening is not a weakness, it's a discipline. It requires self-restraint, it requires humility, but it also sharpens your intuition. You learn who to trust, who's authentic, who's performative. You start to notice patterns in people's behaviors, in their energy, in their inconsistencies, and that becomes your guide. Silence also made me a better storyteller. As an actor, you realize very quickly that real emotion doesn't live in words, it lives in the pauses between them. It's in the hesitation, the breath, the silence that follows a confession. That's where the real story is. And it's the same in life. People will tell you their truth, not always through what they say, but in how they say it. If you're too busy talking over them or rushing to reply, you'll miss it. But if you let the silence hang for a second longer than is comfortable, that's when vulnerability walks in. That's when honesty shows up. We underestimate the power of restraint. We think speaking up at every turn makes us strong. But what really shows strength is choosing not to, choosing to preserve your energy, choosing to let someone else feel heard even when you have so much to say, choosing to wait for the right moment. Timing is everything, and silence teaches you timing. It teaches you patience, and patience is a power move. In a world that moves at the speed of reaction, the person who pauses owns the room. There have been times I could have easily snapped back, defended myself, clapped back online, confronted someone publicly. But instead I chose silence, not because I didn't have the words, but because the words wouldn't have made a difference. The outcome wasn't worth the energy. And in that silence, I kept my dignity. I kept my center. I refused to let someone else's chaos pull me into a space I didn't want to be in. That's control. That's grace. And I've come to realize silence isn't about bottling things up. It's about choosing which battles are worthy of your voice. When you stop feeling the need to react to every opinion, every jab, every judgment, you free yourself. You become grounded in something deeper than approval. You start to trust that not everything needs a response. Not every insult needs a defense. Not every rumor needs correction. People will believe what they want to believe, and trying to change their mind with noise is just giving away your power. But when you hold your ground, when you move in silence, when you keep building quietly, eventually the results speak in a way your words never could. I've learned that stillness is a strength, especially for women, because we're constantly taught to perform, to be agreeable, to be charming, to explain ourselves. But there's something revolutionary about just being still, not rushing to fill the space, not softening your truth for someone else's comfort, just existing in your presence, your purpose, your power. And that's what silence gives you. It teaches you that your worth isn't measured by how many words you speak, but by how you carry yourself in moments when others expect you to fall apart. The world doesn't reward silence immediately. It doesn't applaud stillness. It craves drama, reaction, noise. But that's okay, because silence is not for the world, it's for you. It's where you recharge, where you reflect, where you reconnect with your why. It's where you remember that your voice is not just a sound, it's an instrument. And instruments need tuning. They need care. They need space. When you live too loudly for too long, you forget that. You lose the richness of your own sound. But silence brings it back. It brings depth. It brings alignment. It reminds you that listening to others, to yourself, to life isn't just a soft skill. It's a superpower. Silence, when used intentionally, becomes a tool more powerful than any loud declaration. It's not about muting your voice forever. It's about mastering the art of timing. There's a difference between staying quiet out of fear and choosing silence from a place of control. That difference is everything. When you learn how to hold your words, how to let a moment breathe, how to let your energy speak before your mouth does, you step into a kind of presence that doesn't require validation. Not everyone deserves access to your thoughts in real time. Not every situation deserves your reaction. Some moments require patience, some conversations require observation, and some victories are best built quietly, brick by brick, behind the scenes where no one is watching. In my life, I've come to realize that not every battle is mine to fight, and not every insult is mine to correct. There's a grace in allowing certain things to pass without comment. It's not because I'm indifferent or weak, but because I've seen the cost of constantly explaining myself. I've been in positions where I knew I could out-argue, outshine, outsmart, but I asked myself, at what cost? My peace, my focus, my energy? That's when I started choosing silence, not as surrender, but as strategy. I started realizing that sometimes letting someone think they've won is the most powerful move, because you're not playing for their approval. You're playing a longer game, a deeper game, one where your energy is invested in creation, not in confrontation. I remember moments when I walked into rooms where the energy was thick with assumptions. They had already decided who I was before I spoke. The accent, the background, the way I carried myself, it was all enough for people to form opinions. And I had two choices. I could try to defend, convince, adjust, or I could stay silent, stay grounded, and let time reveal what I was truly made of. I chose the latter. I've learned that proving yourself in every moment is exhausting and unnecessary. The people who matter will see you even when you're not speaking. The rest were never really listening anyway. There is a certain elegance in restraint. There's a quiet kind of power in being misunderstood and not rushing to correct the narrative. Because sometimes the best thing you can do is build so deeply and so intentionally in the silence that by the time they see you again, you've already outgrown their version of you. Let them talk, let them assume, let them write their stories while you keep writing your legacy. Every time I've stayed silent instead of reacting, I've grown stronger. Every time I've chosen to focus instead of fight, I've gone further. It's not about letting people walk over you. It's about knowing when your energy is best spent moving forward rather than being pulled into someone else's chaos. You learn that silence is not just about muting your voice. It's about raising your standards. It's about choosing your battles. It's about saving your energy for places that deserve it. Like, the more I embraced silence, the more I understood the value of presence. Because when you walk into a room and you're not desperate to be seen, people feel that. They feel the self-respect, the self-trust. They feel that you are centered in your purpose. You don't have to speak over others to be powerful. You don't have to dominate the room to make an impact. Sometimes just your silence can shift the energy completely. That's not something you can fake. That's something that comes from knowing who you are, even when no one else does. And silence doesn't mean you're not doing anything. It doesn't mean you're stuck. Sometimes silence is the most productive season of your life. It's where you're planting seeds, making moves, healing wounds, recalibrating your path. It's in those quiet moments when no one is watching that the real transformation happens. Because real growth doesn't need an audience. It needs commitment. It needs solitude. It needs space. I've had seasons in my life where everything looked calm on the outside, but inside I was burning with ideas, vision, hunger. I was building myself in silence so that when the next chapter came, I didn't have to say a word. My work did the speaking for me. When you stay silent long enough, you start noticing patterns. You start seeing people clearly, the ones who only check in when you're winning, the ones who get uncomfortable with your stillness because they can't read you, the ones who need you to explain every step so they can feel secure about your direction. But when you move in silence, you shake those people off naturally. Because silence reveals who's aligned with your spirit and who was only interested in the noise you create. And that realization is priceless. You begin to curate your space with intention. You begin to guard your energy with clarity. You begin to understand that not everything deserves access to your evolution. Silence also forces you to rely on your internal compass. When the world isn't clapping, when no one's watching, when the path feels lonely, you start to ask yourself, am I doing this for the applause, or am I doing this because it's who I am? That's where the confidence comes from, not from external validation, but from internal alignment. When your actions are rooted in your truth, you don't need to broadcast every move. You know where you're going, you know what you're building, and you trust the timing of your life. That kind of silent confidence doesn't need constant explanation. It radiates. It commands respect without saying a word. There will always be people who misunderstand your silence. They'll call it arrogance, detachment, distance. Let them. Because what they don't realize is that silence is often the language of people who are too focused to explain themselves, too committed to entertain distractions, too disciplined to dilute their purpose. And eventually the silence pays off. The clarity, the focus, the groundwork, it all leads to something undeniable. And when it arrives, it doesn't need a long speech. It just lands. It just stands tall. And the silence that built it becomes its foundation. I've learned to stop fearing silence, to stop rushing to fill the space, to stop needing to be constantly heard to feel powerful. Because power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it watches, sometimes it waits. And in that waiting and that observing and that stillness, something remarkable takes shape.